Hello and welcome back to Piracy Radio. In this episode, I speak to a gentleman called Charles Nix, who is the creative director for the type foundry Monotype. I discuss many things, including his early influences and his early career, his time in education, the future of type design, the inevitable AI questions come up, and I ask him if AI is going to kill everyone, the normal stuff. And yeah, I don't want to tell you all this for you listening to it. So I don't know why I do these for, but yeah, enjoy. So yeah, for the people that will be listening to this that maybe don't have the pleasure of knowing yourself, could you give them a bit of a rundown as to who you are and what you do?
Sure. I am Charles Nix. I'm a creative type director. Nope, I have to scratch that. I'm Charles Nix, and I'm executive creative director at Monotype. Up until last year, I was a creative type director. As an executive creative director, I work with our largest customers to achieve whatever typographic vision they have. And generally, that typographic vision includes things like navigating this massive library of typefaces that Monotype has. But it also involves more bespoke things like creating modified typefaces. So taking something that exists in our library of type and creating a specialized version of it. And that could be just renaming it, or it could be changing the shapes of a couple of characters. It could be adding language extensions. There are a lot of things that you can do to modify an existing typeface. And then there's this third thing that we do called custom typefaces. And those, I think a lot of people are familiar with now. They weren't so familiar 20 years ago, but now they're kind of the fabric of branding. And those are typefaces that are built from the ground up. So typefaces that come from an idea. I have not always been either a creative type director or an executive creative director. Prior to my incarnation at Monotype as a type designer, I worked in publishing and in education. So I worked at the Parsons School of Design. I did a little bit of work at Cooper Union, where I graduated, and I worked for all of the publishers. So yeah, that's a little rundown about who I am.
So yeah, to begin with, I like to discuss where people's sort of early interest in the design world came from. And from what I understand with yourself is your father was a printmaker and he sort of designed sort of posters and things for your local community. Could you touch on maybe how that sort of influenced yourself early on?
Sure. So, um, it's one of those things that when you're growing up, you don't really think twice about it because, children adapt to whatever situation they're put in. We had a printing press in our basement from when I was a, a really young person. I remember it being moved in. And it was sort of my dad's after school and weekend or after work and weekend um, printing press. So during the day, he worked for a large earth moving equipment company, a General Motors Corporation, doing their in-house printing. But on the weekends and in the evenings, he would do print for local block club organizations and for the local church. So printing church bulletins for weekend mass, but also just sort of block club news, like local goings on for local organizations. Um, so and odds and ends, little printing jobs. So I'm one of six children, and I sort of sit firmly in the middle of that large family. And we as kids would have things we called folding parties. And we just thought, I mean, again, as you're going through it, you don't sort of question it, but I realize now how strange it was that all six of us would be sitting down with stacks of unfolded paper, creating gate folds or half folds or trifolds or whatever. We would each have our own little dab of glycerin so that we could count out the proper number of sheets. We do half folds, and then we all had bone folders, and we would count them up and make sure that we delivered the right number of printed pieces. And after keep in mind, we ranged, I think, in age at that point from oh, that's a, from 3 to 12, I think. Um, and yeah, that was very much how it was as a child in our house. So I was surrounded by printing and type as a result of the printing, and graphic arts. We had a light table. We had all kinds of sort of typesetting equipment, type retouching equipment, layout equipment around. X-Acto blades were part of my childhood. There are a lot of things that, again, I took for granted, but then I found out later were sort of peculiar. That said, when I left for college, I thought I was going to become a painter. I really like painting, and I liked drawing. I still do. Um, and I thought that that was the sort of path for me. But when I got to college, I found the most interesting conversations were happening in the design department, and specifically around typography and design. And there were a few people who I met in my college years who are I consider now mentors and really helped push me back towards my towards my origin as a printer's son. Sort of like convinced me that typography was a pursuit of grown people, that professionals did it. So, anyways, it's sort of a long-winded story, but there you go.
Do you have mentioning sort of painting things? Do you have like a favorite artist at all?
That's also, I have all the ones you would expect, like Ed Ruscha, Cy Twombly as a favorite of mine. Um, I don't know. I mean, I do tend to gravitate towards artists who have typography and graphic imagery as part of their work. Um, and I like conceptual artists too. And I did early on in my publishing career work with Joseph Kosuth on a book called The Play of the Unmentionable, which was about censorship in art. And it was um, heavily dotted with typography. And Fred Wilson's Fred Wilson's Mining the Museum was another book that I worked on, again with a conceptual artist who who relied heavily on typography and graphic storytelling. So and Hans Hake, of course. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say of course. Hans Hake is to me the sort of one of the godfathers of conceptual art. And as a student, I worked with Hans on making typefaces for some of his art projects, which was a key introduction to digital type making for me. It was that really sort of key period from 1989 to 1991 when type was becoming digital.
Jumping back to, you sort of mentioned going to college. Do you have any sort of seminal moments that you can remember from your college years that really sort of spurred you on in your development?
Um, yeah, I mean there are quite a few, but I'll peg it on people as opposed to moments, because it is. I mean, I was discussing with Phil Garnham today, my fellow executive creative director at Monotype, that as designers, we're so much more in tune with the sort of process oriented nature of things that we are comfortable with the fact that it's not these sort of aha moments so much as aha experiences. So my first experience was with William Bevington, who was my first typography instructor. And his enthusiasm, sort of unbridled enthusiasm for typography at a very pivotal point in my life when I was still a teenager, made a great deal of difference. And again, it wasn't the moment as much as the sort of 15 weeks that I spent with him in my sophomore year that really sort of opened my eyes to the possibilities of typography as a career. George Sadek, who was my boss at my my boss's boss at my work study job, which was at the Cooper Union Center for Design and Typography. Um, and later, George was my junior level typography instructor. His combination of dead seriousness about the craft of typography and sort of whimsical, Dadaistic ideas of creativity still sort of form a great deal of how I think about typography and design. Don Coons, who was my calligraphy instructor, slowed me down enough to concentrate on what it meant to make quality typographic or graphic marks or letter forms, and sort of brought to my education this idea that there's a vocational or spiritual aspect to design and typography. And I know there are probably other pivotal moments, but those are the ones that sort of stick out to me.
Hmm. You wouldn't, at least from my perspective, being in the position you are at the company, while you wouldn't think that your influences were sort of Dada and things like that. You'd think it's kind of like suit and tie almost type of thing.
Yeah, well, there is I do like that sort of suit and tie anachronistic aspect of the sort of monotype reputation, but progress comes from thinking about things in ways that other people have not thought about them. And sometimes that requires, that sort of Dadaistic mentality of just sort of saying, like, I'm going to do the opposite just because the opposite needs to be done, in order to find what happens next or where we can go that we haven't been before.
Jumping back to your career and sort of the path going upwards, from what I understand, once you graduated, you worked at a company called the New Press, and I was having a sniff around on their website, and they described themselves as a book publisher with a social justice mission. Sort of leading on from that, is sort of doing better in the world something that's important to your work at all?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's again something that sort of popped into my head this morning, that there is so when I left my childhood home, I could leave my childhood home because I've been working since I was 13. Not whether I was precocious, it's just that I had a yen for, a nice pair of jeans or to buy my own music. And so my mom and my sister helped me get a job, a, a silly 13-year-old's job. But I was able to earn money to sort of begin paying my way in the world. And then by the time I was 15, I was working in construction and sort of saving money to come to New York. Like, I already knew at that age that I needed to sort of sock away some cash so I could go to New York to go to art school. All of this not is crowing. It's me bragging about working since I was 13. But it is to say that when a child has their own money, there's you can't really stop them from doing the thing that they want to do. Similarly, if someone's not interested in money, then they're far more liable to do whatever they want than somebody who's obsessed with money. And George Sadek used to say there are 3 or 4 different types of people in the world, but the ones you have to watch out for the most are the ones who are in it for, not for the glory, but are in it because they feel philosophically or religiously drawn to it. Whereas somebody who's in it for the money is relatively easy to sort of peg and satisfy. They're not going to derail you from what you want to do. But somebody who has a sort of religious zeal about what they do is sort of dangerous in a way, just because you can't buy them off. All by way of going back to the New Press and sort of publishers in the public interest, which is how they build themselves when I worked with them. Their goal was not to make a ton of money. Their goal was to to change the world through publishing.
Mm.
And my goal now is not to change the world through publishing, but I do want the world to change, and I do want to make change through the work that I do. And I'm less concerned about grabbing stacks of cash than I am with the impact of the work that I do
Mm.
um, on the world and on people around me. Um, so yeah, I suppose it was a part of me that drove me to work with them, and it's a part of what I did with them that still sticks with me.
What does what does changing the world with typography look like?
Hmm. It's sort of like changing the world with printing, in a way, I think, because what we do as type designers or as typographers um, is a lot like what printers were doing in the 15th, 16th, 17th century.
Mm.
Was providing the mechanism by which people can express themselves
Yeah.
and create change. So, I mean, we're part of that equation. Sometimes we can be a very charismatic part of that equation. So, creating typographic form that actually carries meaning that's quite visible.
Mm.
And sometimes it's just being the functional tool for conveying deep thought.
So yeah, this is kind of a bit of a quick fire, a little bit, but obviously since sort of your college days and working, you've designed a lot of typefaces, and I wanted to ask you quick little couple questions. First of all, what's your favorite typeface? If I could push you on that.
I I do have a pat answer for that, which is my favorite typeface is always the last one that I designed.
Mm.
Um, and I mean that's self-serving because it sort of allows me to talk about the last typeface that I designed. But I mean, hopefully the last one is that much closer to where you want to push your art form or your design form. So for me right now, ambiguity is still my favorite typeface, and it's my favorite because I consider it modern. It's to me a typeface that was born out of a concept as opposed to an existing style. It's not a reinterpretation. It's not an update. It's actually something that synthetically I arrived at by thinking about the history of typography and where I wanted it to go next.
Mm.
So it's my favorite.
And then the second one, sort of jumping off of that, what do you think makes a good typeface?
Hmm. Um, I don't know. I mean, that becomes so much about what the intent of the communicator is,
Mm.
that it's difficult to sort of say any more than that. Something that satisfies the needs of the communicator. Um, and because there is that major division in typography between the charismatic display typography, like the big type that people read but also see. They pay attention to the shape of the form and the meaning of the words. And then there is text typography, which is very much about creating um, uh, the optimal uh, accessibility and legibility conditions for communication. So making words communicate their meaning, transferring ideas from one brain to another. It's super functional, but it can do it in an incredibly elegant way and with a subtle psychological rub that really sort
Mm.
of washes over someone as they take in vast amounts of information. Um, so I mean, even in that major divide between display and text, what makes a good typeface is of it's a very different one. What makes a great display typeface is not what makes a great text typeface.
Yeah.
Um, what makes a great text typeface? And I think I've said this before, so I'll try and quote myself accurately. Um, a good text typeface um, does its job so well that you barely know that it's there. Um, but it has that again subtle psychological rub, that sort of idea underneath it that works on the reader and sort of conveys whatever the designer wants it to convey. It could be confidence, it could be trustworthiness, it could be happiness, it could be any number of things. But that sort of that secondary desire to communicate, or that desire to communicate via the form, is secondary to the functional aspect of the typography.
There was I can't remember what the typeface was called exactly, or even I think it was a design agency that designed it, but they had designed a typeface for the Braille Institute. And it was a specific typeface that was designed for sort of legibility for people with learning disabilities. And do you have any thoughts on the idea of like taking a typeface and then bastardizing it, sort of almost for people like people with, dyslexia or visual impairment, that maybe, if you're making each character look completely different to each other, it's easier for them to read, but ultimately it kind of destroys the cohesiveness to the typeface. Do you have any thoughts on the bridge between the two, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think a typeface that helps somebody understand words through reading, regardless of how it looks, is a successful thing. That said, I don't know, in those typefaces that are designed to help people who have various forms of dyslexia, whether there is any one solution that will help everyone in every form of dyslexia. That said, if there is, you've heard it before, if it helps one person, then it's worth it. And in publishing at the New Press, there was quite often, small numbers of books for very small audiences, but people who definitely needed to be published to, or published for. Similarly, designing type. I mean, there's so many type designers now, so many more than when I was a child. That the idea of creating much more sort of specific typographic designs in order to help smaller and smaller segments of the reading population become better and better readers. Why not? The form is relatively unimportant when push comes to shove. The effect of communication is the thing that you're going for. So if it looks terrible but communicates incredibly well, it may not satisfy me as a sort of aesthete, but it would definitely satisfy me as a sort of designer, as a sort of functionalist.
On the note of sort of the fact that there's like 1,000,001 typeface designers now, there's obviously a typeface website called The Font, and there's sort of similar things like that. Do you have any views on sort of that sort of region of things?
I have probably at various points in my career and in my education, which is ongoing, sort of vacillated on this, or thought about it very differently. Right now, I'm of the mind that that there can never be too many typefaces. And unfortunately, there can never be too many quality typefaces too. And what makes a quality typeface is sort of apparent to those of us who make typefaces for a living, and maybe not so apparent to somebody who's trying it for the first time. That said, sometimes a simple sloppy typeface is what the communication requires. And so why not? The problem is not the form of the type. The problem is connecting people who have a need for that form with that typeface. So, I mean, you look at the font, and someone like me could spend the better part of a day, many days of the year, just sort of wading through different typefaces and making snap judgments about their efficacy, or just doing it to be, not to make judgments, but to sort of to read them as form. But the average user doesn't do that.
Mm.
The average user has a really difficult road ahead of them when they try and choose a typeface because there are so many available.
Yeah.
And the sort of Web 1.0 or Web 2.0 versions of what it means to find a typeface aren't really addressing that idea yet. They're still woefully inadequate to connect people with non-professional needs, but very real needs to the typefaces that they want or need. So not terribly upset about the typefaces, not so happy with the interface that allows me to look at them and to sort of get to the thing that I need.
Yeah. In a similar sort of vein, do you have any views on sort of font piracy?
Again, so something it's a topic that I've thought about a lot, obviously, over the past 3 decades. And it used to be the thing that, I mean, it was the bane of it's probably still is, the bane of every type designer's existence. Like for every person that buys your typeface, there are 10 people who don't buy your typeface. And for every 10 people that buy your typeface, there are probably 9.5 that don't understand that they don't own it, that they're just licensing it from you. So there's a lot of education to be done in terms of helping people understand what it means to license a typeface and who the people are behind those typefaces and why it's right to compensate them for their work. But there's also is there any sort of flip side to that? I don't know that there is. I think it's an education thing. You're always going to have people who want to steal things, especially when it's really easy to steal them.
Mm.
I think maybe where I was going at the very beginning of this answer was that we are entering an age of streaming. And this idea of stealing typefaces by copying files is going to become less and less a thing. I mean,
Mm.
we used to steal music. All of us did. We copied MP3 files. It just seemed like we were ripping them from the DVD or CDs that we had bought, or trading them on websites or services. And then it became easier for us to pay for them. And then we stopped doing that, really. We stopped stealing it wholesale, like intellectual property from music artists. So I think we're about to enter into that age in typography where streaming type is going to become more of the norm,
Mm.
and people's sort of collections of vast numbers of pirated typefaces are going to be a lot less useful than just sort of streaming the typefaces you want for the moment.
Yeah. My brain initially went to sort of students that can't afford typefaces, and they almost have to, they want to use, they have the knowledge to use a really good version of Helvetica that maybe you design for yourself, but obviously can't afford it because they just don't have the means to do it. Do you have any sort of thoughts on that sort of area of things? I don't want to
Yeah.
get you in shit, by the way, by
Oh
asking
no,
you
here
these sort
it's
of
fine. It's fine. I think for students, the type industry is, and I mean, Monotype is so big that it's difficult not to think of it as the type industry, because I think there are a lot of foundries out there that are doing a great job of providing reasonably priced typefaces to students, or type licenses for students. Um, I think we at Monotype have a ways to go. It's not that we're not thinking about it, we just haven't figured out how to do it at scale successfully yet. But to provide students with a license that allows them to use it for their schoolwork without having to pay a ridiculous sum of money that's completely out of bounds for them. Um, that said, I think the convergence for those two concepts, the one of us providing students with a reasonably priced solution, is in streaming fonts. So they should have access to everything, but they should have access to it streaming. They can,
Yeah.
I mean, all typefaces anywhere, all the time, but with at an access price that makes sense for a student.
Yeah. Is that the future then? Is that what's coming, sort of the Netflix of being able to just binge anything?
I think I mean, it's already the reality for our agency partners and our brand partners at Monotype. They already have, I mean, agencies have access to our entire type library to pitch with, which is essentially what students need. They need access to the entire library to pitch student ideas. And we're providing that to agency partners. It's just a matter of time before it reaches the student level.
So I have kind of a break point in the middle of each show where I ask each guest the same question. And it's the idea of if we were in a lift together, why we're in a lift, I don't know. You live in a different country to me, but we're in a lift together and we're stuck in this lift. And I asked you if you give me one thing from your career that has been sort of the heartbeat for yourself, the main inspiration point for you, and it could be anything you want, piece of music, a movie, anything, what would that be?
I should have thought about this because I know you warned me that this was going to happen. Um, you're going to hate me. Everyone will hate me if I say what I'm actually thinking. Um, I want a pencil and a blank piece of paper. That's all I ever want. um, I find myself in situations where I don't have something to write or draw with and a surface to write or draw on to be one of the most desperate situations that I'm ever in. I suppose I would find a way if I was at a place where I would find a way to make a mark. But to me, that's it. Like I want to be able to I've taken in so much stuff, and at any point, the stuff that you've taken in your life is the stuff that you are thinking about as you decide what you're going to make. And to me, yeah, blank sheet of paper and a nice pencil would be enough.
Quite poetic. So yeah, we have kind of touched on this in bits, and being in the position that you're in, you're probably privy to sort of the future of the industry. Do you have anything that you could share that you maybe know of that's coming up, with new technology or anything in the type world?
Well, I think we've all sort of gotten acclimated to the idea of variable at this point. So variable fonts are now something that people sort of get conceptually. And if you don't, it's worth checking out. I'm not going to describe them. It'd be better to go and just look up variable fonts. They're fun and it won't hurt you to go look. So I think that is probably in the water at this point. There's more evolution for that. It's going to continue to evolve in ways that are in some ways difficult to predict, and other ways that we're being shown the sort of green shoots of. So if you look at what Craig Ward has done with custom typefaces in variable, I think it's super interesting. It's not a monotype thing, and he's not paying me to tell you that. But I find it sort of as in a way indicative of the sort of fundamental thought that we need to do right now about how variable will change the arc of typography in the 21st century. That said, I think, and I've thought this for a while since working with Joseph Kasuth and Fred Wilson, and to some degree with Hansaka, that the 21st century art form and even the late 20th century art form is curation. There is so much that that already exists, that telling stories through curation and creativity through curation, or curation as creativity, is the it is the horizon. It's no sort of small wonder to me that sort of mid-journey style mashups, or even the musical mashup, arrived when it did. We sort of reached this point where we are so connected, that access to a confusing array of variety, um, leads us to make things that are curated from existing. And it takes a hot moment for you to become aware that the curation itself is a creative act. But once you do, the shift in perspective, of what creativity is, and the possibilities of communication through creativity become vast. That's a sort of cryptic way of saying I think the next frontier in typography is curation.
You mentioned Midjourney, and Adobe are obviously doing some stuff with their kind of AI thing, where with typography specifically, aren't they? Where you can type out what you want the letter forms to look like. I assume you've seen this, where you can sort of say, I want a typeface made out of duct tape, and they'll just magic it up. Do you have any thoughts on that at all? Is AI going to destroy us all, basically, is what I'm asking you, as every podcast is asking right now?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, will it destroy us all? I mean, the the greatest minds in computing seem to think that it will. Um, I vacillate, probably like everyone does, between thinking this is the most amazing thing that has happened in the course of my life, and it being the most terrifying thing that I've ever seen. Um, that said, I don't know that I'm in I suppose if we continue to say that it's the most amazing thing, then we're contributing to its inevitable rise and destruction of the human species. But I find it endlessly fascinating to engage with, because um it is the doorstep of what I in the early aughts, 2003, I was theorizing as a new plastic reality, that we would eventually connect so much of what we understand about ourselves in the moment and our history, um, through digital means, that we would eventually create the ability through computing power to create a new plastic reality, a reality that wasn't real, but had so much of what we understand of reality baked into it that we would be unable to discern it. And so that you could say something like you say to Midjourney, and Midjourney's, and this is why I call it the doorstep. You can say, as I did, I would like to see, WPA style black and white photographs of the Dust Bowl, but with a clown troupe, just to sort of see what would happen. Because there were no, I mean, people weren't clowning in the Dust Bowl in the United States. They were sort of trying to scratch out um, life from a place that was being choked by dust. But the idea of inserting clowns into that and then having Dorothea Lange take photographs of them, to me, seemed like, why not? And I could say that, and it would do it for me. And it would do it very convincingly. That, to me, is the sort of doorstep of a new plastic reality where, and when I posted those particular images on Instagram, it was early days of Midjourney, and so nobody had any idea where they came from. People assumed that Dorothea Lange had done these photographs of, so they had achieved their purpose, which was to sort of show a new plastic reality, a fake reality, but one that was so convincing that, and I feel like there's a danger in that, obviously, but there's a thrill in it also. But boy, what it means for us as a species, what it means for us as a political animal, what it means for us as nations, all of it is so fraught that it's really hard to get behind it wholeheartedly because there are so many people who will be fooled into doing
Mm,
things that make no sense.
yeah. I don't want to turn this into like a spiritual thing, but if it's getting to a point where we can't discern this one at this table that I'm touching from an AI generated table, do we live in a simulation, do you think, Charles? Or
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you've probably seen the latest Marvel installation on Disney Plus, and it begins with this sort of basic question, or the premise of the show is that we've reached that point where all information has become so dubious that the only thing you can trust is the person you know. Um, I don't know. It is that we have verged into um, philosophical territory, and I suppose that we'll deal with it in much the same way that we've dealt with every major technological revolution in the past 400 years. We'll sort of like bumble through. It will change us irrevocably, and somehow we as a species will survive.
do you think that um there was kind of at the beginning of all of this, there was like a craft that went into doing things, you know, when people designed the typeface, for example, there was a real human craft that went into it. And given where we are now, the fact that I can type things into Google on a machine and it just spits it out, do you think that we've lost sort of the love of craft?
No, I don't. I mean, I think we still, those of us who loved craft, and we're in the Lovecraft territory. Um, those of us who loved craft before still love craft. Um, and those of us who love craft define it for ourselves. So it might be working with your hands, it might be your mind and hands. It might be only your mind. The craft doesn't have to necessarily involve this laborious nature of hand tools. Um, it's more the amount of time and thought and sort of, I don't know, spirit that you put into it, self that you put into it, time that you put into it. So um, it's the craft is always there. If you want to sort of slow things down in a sort of Luddite manner and sort of go back to a time prior to the one that we exist in, it's fine. The nostalgia is I find very problematic. This idea of sort of ascribing to a previous period some better sort of way or better sort of time or betterness. It's problematic because all of those earlier periods were fraught in ways that made them suboptimal or not perfect. So, um, I want to be alive today, right now, talking to you, and I want to sort of be not sort of happy in that moment, but be very pleased to be in that moment. And watching the world change, which is inevitable, and watching the way that the craft that I'm vocationally drawn to change. It's a joy. It's a pleasure. We're lucky to be here.
Beginning to sort of round off now. There was like a trend a couple of years ago where everybody was stretching type. Spotify made it a huge thing for like their Spotify Wrapped, as far as I can remember. I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on sort of the trends that come and go, where people just sort of butcher type, but sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. What do you think about that?
I like them all. Um, I like them. I like them mostly when, like, what I've seen in the past couple of days, is that the Midjourney aesthetic is becoming an aesthetic. It's becoming a trend. So I saw some graphics at Glastonbury. And I wasn't there, but in in the videos that I've watched of it, and I just saw an agency sort of take it on. I've seen some things on television, some things in the subway that are obviously sort of acknowledging that this sort of weird warped aesthetic of Midjourney is with us. Um, and sometimes they make sense and sometimes they don't. And typographically, I find the same thing. There's almost an inevitability that there will be people who are looking for a new way to express an idea. They have content and concept sort of rolled up in one another, and they create new aesthetics, new trends, and sort of shed them just as quickly, because they're not interested in the trend itself. They're interested in the fitness of the style to the message. Um, that said, it's endlessly fun to watch people cycle through trends like that crazy Art Nouveau trend that just sort of came and went. I mean, still sort of around, but it really came and went last year and the year before. Um, I find all those things really exciting. I find the fact that those things can get into the water and influence people, and us very rational people can behave in ways that don't really make sense. I find that really exciting. Um, Trends of stretching type. I don't know. I don't have any. Nothing's so sacred that it can't be violated. It is type after all.
Yeah, sort of beginning to close off with the sort of the last question I ask everyone. It's a very, very, very cliche, but it's just the question of if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice when you first got started, what would that be for yourself?
It's contradictory advice because I know that I would not be able to follow it. But it is to trust your instincts. That sometimes the thing that your is telling you inside of your head that other people are telling you is not true is actually true. And it may take you a while to find out that what you thought was true is actually true, or the feeling that you had, or the thing that you wanted to do. Um, yeah, you have to trust yourself, trust your own aesthetic, trust your own sort of judgment, trust yourself. Um, I think, um, you know, yeah, is there more to it than that? No, it's just trust yourself.
I think that's quite poignant. Do you ever get the chance to kind of, and I don't want this to turn into me just sort of kissing your ass, but you've obviously worked in some like huge things now. You've helped to redesign Helvetica, which is design, it's ginormous, isn't it? Do you ever get a chance to kind of look back at what you've done at all and think about what you've done?
Nah, I don't. I mean, um, to me, to to me, it is so much. It's so much about process. That I really, really love those. I love the moment. Um, and I mean, I think of like those times when I really do feel really excited. Like I did this. One that really pops to mind right now is I worked on this book called Free at Last, um, which I mean is a piece of period typography. So it has a very sort of 19th century look, big book, like 600 pages, 5.5 by 8.5, set in Divini, which is a sort of um, a 19th century modern, so like Bedoni, but with tapered serifs. Um, and the way that the book came together is like 7 different authors translating or transcribing firsthand accounts of freed men and women post-slavery and well during the Civil War and post-Civil War. But the documents were all technic technically were set up in such an amazing way that that it was, despite the fact that it looks like a 19th century artifact, it was an amazing accomplishment of 20th century typesetting. Um, and it's a beautiful book. The material is amazing. Um, the design is um, the design is nice. I like it. The title page is beautiful. Jacket's not so great. But the reason I'm walking down memory lane on that in particular and going into all the details that there was at the Maryland Historical Society a publication party where Ira Berlin, the chief editor, and all of the contributors were there, and I got to talk to each of them and have them sign my book and just sort of live in the moment and celebrate what we had done together. And that that moment and most of those sort of book parties and openings or pub dates for typefaces or speaking engagements, I find them all really amazing. Um, but I don't spend a lot of time looking back on them or sort of patting myself on the shoulder because there's always this thing in front, this reason that you get up and do the thing that you want. And I have children who don't really find it that amazing, any of this stuff. They keep me very grounded. Um, so yeah, I enjoy all of it, but I enjoy the process of it.
And then, super, super, super lastly, have you got anywhere where people can find yourself online?
Um, my Instagram feed is sort of where like most people, show, especially typographers, show what I've been looking at, what I'm finding interesting typographically or seeing in my environment. Um, and I'm at Chas Nix, that's CHASNIX. And that's my uh, Instagram handle. I don't do Twitter anymore. I find it morally dubious. I'm not on Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn. But otherwise, most of what I'm doing is available via Monotype's channels. So you'll see a lot of me there.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fine then. Let me just start recording. Hello, it is I. Thank you for listening. Hopefully more of these to come. I mean, kind of good with the consistency of the last couple, but whether that'll continue, I don't know. Um, yeah, hopefully. Yeah, if you want to find me anywhere, I'm proud of the material. Anywhere and everywhere, basically. Yeah, and I will see you next time. Bye.